Good evening, everybody, and welcome again to the Borderline Podcast with me, your host, Andrew Willix. Guys, we're starting a new chapter of the Borderline Podcast tonight, and I couldn't be happier to bring this episode to you. I'm extremely proud to have gotten to this point and to be moving the Borderline Podcast across another continent to be interviewing somebody. Is just remarkable for how fast we're growing and how far we've come in such a short period of time. That simply would not be possible without you guys, the listeners. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. And to celebrate this brilliant occasion, I've got an absolutely outstanding guest on for you tonight. Now, I appeared on his show, his podcast, The Wellness Center, the other week. So I learned a little bit about Chase and a little bit about his story, which I know is going to be an incredibly upsetting one. It does talk about suicide. So I just want a little bit of your discretion just now that there is subjects of talking about suicide. And it is going to be something that relates to a lot of young men, I think. I think we can probably relate to a lot of what Chase has maybe went through and to understand some insecurities about our own selves and the way that we've grown up and we are today. He's also an incredibly intellectual guy, and you're going to be blown away by his intellect in this episode. It's been an absolute pleasure. Guys, I really hope you enjoy this one. At the end of the episode, if you do want to put any kind of feedback, do like it, give it a 5-star rating on Spotify. It really helps me boost. What I'd love you guys to do after this episode is head across to Chase's channel. That's the Wellness Center podcast. Give it a follow on Spotify and go listen to some of his content because it is just brilliant. And I hope that, again, in the future, we're going to meet up again and collaborate in another episode because it was a brilliant occasion. And again, Chase, thank you so much. So without further ado, guys, enjoy. Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. How are you doing?
Bro, I am doing so good. How are you doing today?
I'll start off this episode again by just saying thank you so much for having me the other week. It was a pleasure to be on your show. I really enjoyed, meeting you for the first time. You're really relaxing and you just kind of put me at ease straight away. And I really enjoyed doing that episode. So thank you so much once more for giving me that opportunity, man.
Hey, dude, you know what? My pleasure. Thank you for coming on my show. And at the same time, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to meet you so that like the kind of the awkward, like first date kind of podcast feel was with my stuff. So now I get to come on your show and just be as natural as I can possibly be. So no, I'm really blessed for the opportunity to be here, man. Thank you for having me on your show as well. This will be a lot of fun.
Excellent. And if you missed it in the intro, guys, Chase is joining us all the way from America. It's Utah you're from.
That's right. Yeah. A little town called South Ogden, Utah.
It's nice. So none of my regular listeners will know who Chase Warburton. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, Chase, how you've obviously came to be who you are and why our universe is crossing our paths.
Yeah, absolutely. All great questions. So a little bit about who I am as an individual right now. So I am 28 years old. I am married to the love of my life. We've been married for over 6 years. We have 2 beautiful children and one on the way. So my son is 4, my daughter is 3, and then we have a little grape-sized baby, and my wife, it's due, I don't know the gender, is due in December. And so I'm definitely a family man. Some of my hobbies include like smoking meat. I love boxing and any fighting sport. I absolutely love cold plunging. I love being out in nature, meditation. I love humor. I love food. Oh my gosh, I love food. I have a problem. I love food. And I work at a wellness center where we specialize in red light therapy. It's a business that my mom and I own. What kind of got me to this point is the kind of the short answer, just to kind of get through it. I have struggled in the realm of mental health since the time I was aware of it since the time I was 10. Doing work now, I can look back and see that I actually struggled with mental health from the time that I was 3. And what that struggle turned into was a pornography addiction when I was 8. And that lasted up until I was 25. It also turned into a vaping addiction, a smoking addiction, a drinking addiction, a sex addiction, a weed addiction, video game addiction, food addiction, and pretty much anything you can imagine that is used to cope other than hard drugs. And I really started getting hardcore into the drugs around the time that I walked away from Christianity, around the time I was about 15, 16. And, just started making really bad choices, hanging out with the wrong crowd, or not the wrong crowd, so to say, but people also hurting, people who were also making decisions, just trying to survive. Just a group of boys that were kind of gaslighting each other into those bad habits. And, I was in high school at the time. I remember this so clearly. And I remember, for whatever reason, I was like set in stone on proving my mom wrong, that I was actually capable of being successful on my own. So I remember my dad got me a job, which doesn't help with my case, but I graduated high school early and I moved across the country about 1,300 miles away to a state called Arkansas. And I remember in Arkansas, I was 18 and had a lot of struggles. But when I was in Arkansas for about 4 or 5 months, I lost my grandpa to old age. I lost my 16-year-old sister to suicide, and totally changed my life, totally rocked my world. And I remember getting deeper and more into drugs and pornography and alcohol and cigarettes. And it kind of got to this point where I was about 3 days before my 21st birthday. And up until that point, my drink of choice was Everclear. I was doing dabs. I was smoking constantly. I was vaping just as much as I was smoking. And I was doing everything I possibly could to numb out any pain that I was feeling, because I wasn't enough for people. And at the same time, I felt like I was responsible to hold everyone else's emotions because of how my sister's death played out. And all of these things just culminated into this really terrible life, to be honest with you. I was miserable. I was highly suicidal. I was diagnosed with depression. And then come 3 days before my 21st birthday, right? The big birthday in America, because when you're 21, that's when you're allowed to drink. That's when it's legal. And I had so many friends that were like, we're taking you to every bar in northern Utah, and you're not going to remember the next 3 days. Make sure you get those days off because you're just going to be hurting. And I was so pumped for it. Finally, I was doing something that was legal, right? And about 3 days before my 21st birthday, I remember waking up and thinking, I hate this life. I was on a tile floor. I was being spooned and spooning a couple of guys I had just met the night before. All clothed, of course, but still, I was hungover, miserable. It's disgusting. And I was just like, this life sucks. I'm done. I don't ever want to be in this life again. So I went back to the church that I grew up in, which is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, nicknamed the Mormons. And I spoke with my ecclesiastical leader. And I spoke with him for about 4 hours. And throughout that 4-hour confessional, essentially, I bore my heart and my soul out to him and to God. And after those 4 hours, I remember going home, and at the time I just had a vape pen. I didn't have anything else on me, but I threw my vape pen away, my e-cig away. And I walked away from everything that night cold turkey. And I was able to walk away from everything without a single withdrawal. It was a huge blessing. The only thing I couldn't shake, though, was my pornography addiction. And that continued to manifest in an unhealthy way up until I was 25. And at the time when I was 25, I was married for about 3 years. I had a son who's 2, and we had just had my daughter. And I remember there was a time early on in my daughter's life where I looked at her and said, and I just looked at her and I just felt so much love for her. And I remember looking at her and I said, wow, I'm a piece of crap. I would never want my daughter to marry someone as neglectful and awful and manipulative and addicted as I am. I'm a POS. I'm a piece of crap. And I remember sitting down and telling my wife about a recent relapse that I had just had. And I was like, man, I need help. I can't do this alone anymore. I'd done everything up in my life up until that point alone, or what I thought. And she looked at me and she says, yeah, as a good wife should, you need help. And so I joined a therapeutic group in my local town up in Logan, Utah, where I live. And I've been doing it ever since. And, just through these last couple of years, because again, I'm 28, is where I've really started fighting for my own heart and learning to thrive and developing skills and tools that are really blessing me. And throughout that whole process, because, how I know you asked how I got here, the Wellness Center podcast came because I got to a point where I realized mental health is still stigmatized pretty heavily, right? That's the reason we both have these podcasts. And I don't anyone to ever feel like what they're feeling isn't normal. So I started this podcast, my podcast, the Wellness Center podcast, is a way to destigmatize mental health. So that's me.
And really, I can't really say much to that, but obviously we'll file into some questions because that's deep and obviously very tragic. Obviously it's hard for me to relate somewhat with the childhood. Obviously, like I said on your podcast, I had what I recognize quite a happy upbringing. Obviously recognizing depression at such a young age, how I'm sorry, that's such a blunt question. At such a young age, whilst not even fairly mature.
That's a great question. And, I first recognized that I struggled with my mental health when I was about 10 years old. That was when I knew that I was sad and I wanted to kill myself, right? The first time I really struggled with suicidal ideation when I was 10. I didn't recognize a lot of what the mental health stuff was up until way later in my life. But, looking back and doing the work and, doing the meditations and the mindfulness and the practice and the journaling and whatever it was, what kind of happened. And maybe just a side step here too, I had a really good childhood, right? I lived in a 2-parent home with a dad who worked really hard and a mom who was there for us, right? There were a lot of aspects of my life where I am truly, truly blessed. And I can't even imagine what other people, right? Single parent homes or abusive parents, what they were like. And for me though, in my own personal experience in life, looking back on it, when I was 3 years old, we had adopted a little girl from the Marshallese Islands, I believe, either Marshallese or Haiti, one of those two. And her name was Lacey. We brought her over as a newborn and we had her for 3 years. And after 3 years, we ended up giving her back up for adoption. And what that taught me at that age, what that really ingrained in my system, was that I had to behave. I had to get in line, check myself, or I would be given away. And another thing that really affected me when I was 3 was that my mom was really focused on material items, right? She wanted the nice couches and the nice clothes, and she wanted the kids who knew how to set the table. And so I felt like I was a second priority, like I wasn't prioritized. And those were 2 major things that happened before I was 3, or when I was 3. And there was also a time when I was much younger. I don't remember how old I was, but I feel like it really stepped me into the world of addiction. So I'm incredibly ADHD, top 5 percentile, according to American medicine. And so I was prescribed this medication called Adderall. I don't know what they have in Scotland, but Adderall is kind of one of the big ADHD medications. And I remember there was one day that I had missed taking my Adderall. And as a young age, I kind of had the thought, I missed my Adderall yesterday. Better take 2 today to catch up. And I remember taking 2 Adderall and I had 25 milligrams, which is one of the highest doses you could have. And I remember just telling my mom, I was like, hey, I just took 2 Adderall. I'm caught up. I'm a good boy. And she was like, we got to call poison control. You might get taken away for this. And like, she was freaking out and she was doing the best that she knew how. And I felt incredibly shamed for doing what I thought was right. And that created a pretty big codependency with my mom, where I knew I had to seek her approval in order to be okay. And so there was a lot of things from a really young age that really affected my mental health in the long run. But yeah, I just remember, and then again, the first time I recognized it being 10 again, I don't remember exactly what had happened, or like, there wasn't a specific event. I just remember so clearly laying in my bed one night, laying there looking up at all the swords that I collected, because I love collecting swords. I've always been into like the Japanese swords and all, like I used to have Legolas's twin blades from Lord of the Rings. My brother had like Sting from the Lord of the Rings. So we're just big nerds. And I remember laying there and looking up at probably the 5 or 10 swords that I had hanging up on their plaques. And I just started hitting the side of the wall with my body. And I was just praying that the swords would fall down and impale me so I could die. And yeah, that was the first time I struggled with suicidal ideation. And how I coped with it, I didn't as a kid, right? I didn't know what to look for, what the signs were, any of that stuff. What I did do was I started seeking other people's approval. I got really needy. I would eat a lot of food, good food, right? Hamburgers and chocolates and chocolate milk and all the good stuff I still love to this day, but for different reasons. I would do that, or I'd play video games like crazy. I mean, hours and hours and hours and hours on end. And I would act out in anger, and I would do passive aggressive things, and pornography, right? Great release, not a healthy release, but it's effective in what it does, unfortunately. So yeah, it was all very, very unhealthy, and it only got worse, right? Because I know I talked about earlier getting into alcohol and smoking and drugs, and it just got worse and worse and worse until I knew that I couldn't do it anymore, right? And at that point, I had been highly suicidal. It's all I thought about. I couldn't hold a relationship down. And yeah, it just continued to spiral until I finally got at least one tool, which was religion, right? And that one tool was effective for about 5 years. And then I realized that one tool wasn't effective anymore. So I just started getting more.
Yeah, nice. So like you say, you must have an array of coping strategies just now. You spoke earlier, obviously, a little bit about meditation and being out in nature. Being out in nature is, I absolutely love it. What is it like that? Like, I'm just curiously asking a kind of by question here. You don't get like bears and that in Utah?
Yeah, great question. So there are like mountain bears and mountain lions and skunks and raccoons and foxes and all those things, but most of the time they're more scared of you than you are of them. Yeah. And so I've actually never seen a bear in Utah, right? When you go to like Yellowstone National Park, right, one of the big parks here in America, they have bears there in cages like in a zoo. I've seen a lion paw print, but again, I've never seen a lion or a bear out in the wild. So they're pretty far and wide and few in between.
Yeah, wow. But as I said, the most dangerous land animal we have in Britain's the badger. Don't know if you know what that is. It's about 2 feet.
I do know what a badger is, and I know they're pretty feisty. They're kind of like skunks, except skunks smell bad.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Obviously, you spoke earlier about losing your sister, which I'm not asking you to go into any detail of that, but how was that? As you say, you'd already turned to alcohol and other substances. I'm assuming that just excelled that.
Yeah, it did. And I'm happy to talk about it, or not happy to talk about it. However, I'm open to talking about it, right? It's never a happy thing. But, it wasn't good. I was, again, living about 1,500 miles away from, and I don't know what the conversion is to kilometers for your guest, but it was, multiple states. It was about 24 hours of driving was about the distance on freeways, busy mainways. And I remember the day she died was obviously really rough. And I remember getting home because I flew home. And when I remember going down the escalator from the airport and like looking at my parents who were waiting at the bottom of it, and they had aged 10 years easily in one night. And I remember they gave me a big hug and we're all crying in there in the airport, just snot's going everywhere, crying is everywhere. And we go and climb in a car because one of my mom's best friends drove her and my dad to pick me up. And they put me in the middle seat and they both put their heads on my shoulders, right? I had to be the strong one. I had to hold the space for them so that they could cope and mourn with the loss of my sister Hannah. I couldn't. I had to be the strong one. And that stayed true through getting her prepped for the viewing, through the thousands of people in the viewing, through the funeral. I was the strong one. And I'm not going to say people didn't ask if I was okay, right, in all of this process, because they did. And I really appreciate those people that did come and hold space for me. And my biggest memory was that I was the one that would hug every single person, thousands of people. Hey, how are you doing? I love you. It's going to be okay. You got this, right? Talking about my sister. I'm so sorry that she's gone. I know that's hard on you. Like, I'm here for you. If you need anything, you've got this. It's going to be okay. Right? That was what I told people. And I know some people told that to me. And again, it wasn't as prevalent as what I was doing. And because I had to be the stoic one and the strong one, that caused me to shove down a lot of my emotions. I remember the first night getting home and put my mom and dad to bed and went into her room and grabbed her little pig plushie and had a good cry. Good, big mouth, open, long, wailing cry. And then I remember at the time that she was doing drugs too. And I was like, well, I better go search her car and make sure that mom and dad don't find any of her drugs, because I don't want them to have that memory of her. And I remember going and finding this big old sack of weed. In my 18-year-old self, I was like, man, I better smoke all this before my parents find out. So I take it down to my friend's house, and I remember smoking out of a corn cob pipe, just like the Frosty the Snowman corn cob pipe. And I smoked so much that night. I remember having a seizure in his bathroom before throwing up, and then somehow driving all the way home on my own. I was in and out of consciousness. I went open over a mountain with a very narrow road. Somehow I didn't die by divine design. Thank you, Heavenly Father. And yeah, that was kind of my life, right? I quit the job that was doing actually really well and paying me really good. And I started working dead end jobs. And my whole life, instead of partying on the weekends with my friends, my whole life from 18 after my sister died till about 20 was getting high and getting drunk, having sex, playing video games, doing anything I could to cope. And that's what my life turned into. And, at 19, I remember at like 4 a.m, a couple days before New Year's, I called my mom and was like, if you don't come get me, I'm going to kill myself. So she came and picked me up and put me in the hospital, and I was in an intensive care unit for 5 days. And yeah, dude, it was honestly, it just got so much worse after my sister died.
Yeah, that's really, really, really rough. Obviously, you're saying that you're using the diverse range of substances to cope. How apparent was it for you yourself personally, though? Even when you're so high. I mean, I know it's like you get so high, you get so drunk. It's that escapism. Did that make you free from the pain, or was that you knew? Because I knew personally for the end, definitely with alcohol, I know that I was, even before I was drinking, it was making me even more depressed because I knew what I was doing. Were you apparent? That's the question that I'm kind of going for there. Is was it an apparent feeling within yourself that you were doing the wrong thing, or was it kind of like, yeah, I'm also enjoying the lifestyle, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the answer is honestly both. I have a lot of good memories from that time, right? I had a lot of fun partying and being the wild party animal and being loved by everyone in that scene and knowing the music and the lingo and knowing how things worked and having the connections and the hookups. There was a lifestyle that was fun, and it was wild, and it was dangerous, and it was all of those things that you kind of hope for in a life. However, it was coupled, like you said, with those unhealthy practices, right? With the dependencies. And if there was ever a time I got sober, which honestly wasn't often, I was miserable. I hated it. And I couldn't wait to get my next cigarette or my next alcoholic drink or my beverage. So yeah, there were good times with it too. It was fun and it was miserable at the same time.
Yeah.
And to kind of answer the question, I didn't really recognize it. Right? I was just letting my subconscious and my addictions drive me. It's like I knew what I wanted. I knew how to get it, and I just did what I wanted. And I didn't realize how that lack of control was controlling me more than being boundaried. Because I've learned that throughout life that having true boundaries like what you and I have now, farther along in recovery, is what creates true, lasting freedom. So, yeah, there was a lack of control in my life.
And obviously, you spoke about a little bit earlier. You then turned back into religion. Obviously, that was a huge shift in your life as a whole. You mentioned that it was, it was almost an instant turning point for you. Is that true? Was it just you could just understand what you needed to do, how you then needed to live your life to stop yourself falling back into the unhealthy habits?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I knew, because I grew up right in religion. I was born into it. I'd been raised in it my whole life. I'd been going to church every week and doing all the programs throughout the week and stuff. So I knew the teachings, I knew the lessons, and I knew what they tried to offer and provide. The ward or the group that I went to every week, there were some kids in it that were quite rude and bullied me and my older brother and my younger sister quite a lot. So what I chose to do with the religion, instead of saying, hey, this is a hospital for the sick, I said, no, this is a place for the unrighteous and the judgmental, because that's all I see. And I'm not going to associate myself with a church that fosters and raises people that are going to judge and bully. That doesn't work for me. I don't like this feeling. I don't like being afraid to come to church. And I still knew that that was just the people in the church, not the actual church and the teachings of the church itself. It was a really skewed view, to be honest with you. And when I finally got back into it, I just kind of knew it was time. There wasn't like some major shift of like, I need God again. It was just, I just remember thinking, I'm like, it's time to have God back in my life, because he's the one that's going to be able to change me. And so again, after I went and owned everything that I was doing, because most of the time, especially in my history with what I've done, and I don't know if it's been the same for you, is I was very secretive about my life, right? Not a lot of people knew what I was doing on the day to day. I had a roommate at the time who was involved in everything I was doing, but the girls that I was pursuing, my parents, my brother, and everyone else in the world didn't truly know the extent of who I was becoming and everything that I was doing, because there was a lot of shame behind it, right? I thought that I was a bad person because I was making bad choices. And I got off on a tangent there. But
That's okay, man.
no, when I went back to the church, and secrecy, that's what I was talking about. So when I went back to the church and I wasn't secretive anymore, and I just practiced true self-awareness by owning everything. And I'd love to talk that a little bit more later in the podcast, right? These pillars that I use to create a solid foundation in my life. But this self-awareness of everything I was doing and owning every thoughts and the feelings and the actions and the emotions and the life outcomes and the situations and everything that I was doing. And when I finally owned it and said, okay, this is who I am. This is who I've been. This is me. It's a pretty terrible me, right? This is me that's making a lot of really bad choices, and this is still me. And I'm okay that I've done this, and I'm not okay with it anymore. So it's time for me to make a shift. And I think showing up that way in this situation in my life, and for your listeners, if you show up that way with any aspect of your life, where you practice that self-awareness of just owning who you are fully, shamelessly, and then also accepting it fully for what it is. Doesn't mean you have to be okay with it, but you're okay with it. You're okay that it's happened, right? All things are as they should be because they are. And so I owned it. And then I went to him and I got a blessing from him, right? And I just remember him saying that I'll be free, that I got this, that, having God on my side, that I can manage this, I can make this happen. And after that, I just went home and I said, I'm done. And I meant it from the bottom of my heart. They say that an addict will quit their addiction hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, right? And I was that addict as well, right? You always put down your last bottle and you say, I'm never drinking again. I feel terrible. And next night you're picking up a bottle. You smoke your last cigarette and you're like, I'm never smoking again. You go buy another pack. I said it and I meant it. Deep down in my heart, I was done. No intention of ever picking it up again. And I haven't. So over 8 years now into my journey, and I still have absolutely no interest in picking any of it back up because I knew it didn't work for me anymore.
Brilliant. And that was a lovely message as well that you did give to my listeners. And I do relate to a lot, well, some of what you said there, especially about just accepting who you are, and just it's okay to kind of throw it out and throw out your mistakes. And like I said, our universe has crossed our paths to try and help educate people not to make the same mistakes. And yeah, that was lovely put, man. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Obviously, just moving on a little bit more. You're just talking into kind of your coping skills in your life now. Can you talk just a little bit? Obviously, you said earlier that you've got this mass arsenal, so to speak, of coping strategies and coping skills. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to talk a little bit about how it's evolved up to this point too, just to help people understand that life is an evolving process, and that typically your first attempt at something isn't the most perfect or best for you. So when I first got into recovery work, I remember having this thought of like, I need to control and limit myself in a very extreme way. So what I did is I took my phone and I said, all right, my phone, I'm never using it unless it's around my spouse, right? And I'm going to get an Apple Watch. And if my wife is gone, my phone's getting locked, and I'll use my Apple Watch to talk and text with people, right? Because I can just use the voice to text or the voice call. And I was like, I have to work out every day, and I'm waking up at 5:30 and I'm doing this super extreme thing. And my life just became like this cage, this really small cage of rigidity. And I just had to do everything in my cage, or my anxiety would like beat the snot out of me. And then I'd have to come cry to my wife and tell her how awful of a person I am and just like recommit to the process. It was awful, to be honest. It was almost worse than just being in my addiction. And I get to this point, right, about a year and a half ago, where I'm like, I want to be free. I want to be controlled, right? I want to be boundaried, and I want to be free. So I just started questioning what was working for me and what wasn't, right? And I started giving myself a little bit of leeway, like, right, where is it safe? Where am I actually safe, right? Where do I show up as my best self? And I just started molding and adapting. And I'm a millennial also. So for those listening, I know that most millennials have the I want it now mentality. The 2-day Amazon shipping mentality is a good way to put it, or J.G. Hepworth motto, right? It's my money and I want it now. So, or 877 cash now, right? I mean, these commercials are so far and wide, and they're so good, and they definitely feed into the instant gratification mentality. And I started to develop this mindset that, wow, recovery work isn't instant gratification. That I can't take the 18 years that I was an addict, or not even 18, almost 20, about 18 years that I was an addict. And, and if you look at it on a scientific form, I started when I was 8, which scientifically speaking is about the first time you actually develop a conscious brain, right? Up until that point, you're just acting subconsciously. And my addiction lasted until I was 25, which science says is when your brain is fully developed. So I have taken my full brain developmental life and trained it to rely on pornography and drugs and gratification from other people and instant stuff. You can't, and I'm hard pressed to believe this, I'll go toe to toe with anyone, you can't change that amount of programming overnight, right? It's impossible. I've yet to meet a person who can. And if you can, and if you can prove it, I will pay you any amount of money. I don't care. I'll make it happen, right? Because that sounds great. I'm a millennial. I want it now. It's my brain and I want it back. But what I've personally developed is that this is a slow compounding effect, right? That this journey of recovery, this journey of fighting for your heart, this journey of working through mental health is actually small. It's small, consistent changes over a long period of time. And there are some steps that I developed that need to happen before you can start making changes, right? Before you can make effective change, I believe you need, and this is what I call my 3 pillars and my keystone, right? If you know, in any archway, in any building, it needs a keystone to hold it together. So I have what's called the 3 pillars of a firm foundation. And this is what my newest development of my mental health is. So it's subject to change, but this is what I'm writing my book on. And, surprise, I'm writing a book. And
Nice.
it talks about the 3 pillars of a firm foundation. And the first one is self-awareness, right? Being aware of who you are and what you're feeling and owning it, right? My name is Chase. I cut my hair by myself 2 weeks ago. And to be honest, I feel like I've got the haircut from Sid from Toy Story, the bully. And I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I'm not willing to admit that I need a haircut by someone else because I did it and I'm proud. Because I'm prideful, right? But like self-awareness, right? I'm sitting in some anxiety today, right? And I'm owning all of these aspects of me. It's full self-awareness, right? People can do this through meditation. Meditation is a great one, right? And I know we talked about meditation on my podcast with you because you're huge into meditation, right? So just going into oneself and learning about who you are and allowing yourself to give you the answers that you need. You can journal about it. Being self-aware can also look like getting angry and speaking your piece, right? Because who tells the truth? Angry drunks, right? They're saying exactly what's on their mind. So get angry and speak your piece. So that's the first step, is self-awareness. You have to have self-awareness before anything else. The second step is rigorous acceptance. A term that's more widely known in the world is radical acceptance. I personally don't like the term or the word radical. I think there are some negative connotations with it. So I use the term rigorous. Rigorous acceptance is accepting all things are as they should be because they are. Right? Like, I've got a Sid haircut right now. And you know why I have the Sid haircut? Because I'm supposed to have it. And I'm supposed to have it because I do. Right? I'm supposed to be feeling anxious this morning because I'm supposed to be. And you know how I know for certainty I'm supposed to be feeling anxious? It's because I am.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a statement that you have to say at the end of any time you practice rigorous acceptance. And it's 3 words. And that's okay. I'm feeling anxious this morning, and I have been all morning because of just some conversations that didn't go the way I was hoping for. And that's okay. Right? That's okay. To be okay with yourself. That's the acceptance, the rigorous acceptance. The third pillar is your self-love. To say, I'm anxious this morning, and that's okay. And I'm still a worthy human being who loves myself fully and completely in all of my flaws. If I don't trim my beard right and I feel like I'm an idiot because I can't trim my beard, I still love myself fully. Or if I cut my hair and it looks like Sid from Toy Story and I feel like some punk kid, I still love myself, right? And once you have all of those things and you have all of those pillars that create a really solid awareness of oneself, in order to solidify the foundation, you need a keystone. And to me, that's a relationship with a higher power, right? And that's different for every person, right? For Buddhism, you've got your Buddha. For Christians, you've got Jesus Christ. For the Taoism, you've got the Dalai Lama. I don't know if that's true, but every religion has their higher power, right? Some people see it as their higher self. It's different for every single person. And you just have to have a solid relationship with that being, that entity, because that entity is going to be a guiding light for you. And to me, that entity is what creates the solid foundation, the firm foundation upon which you build. If the winds come, your foundation will never fail, right? You need those 4 things. Yeah. And then I talk a lot about, and I know I'm rambling, so cut me off if you need to.
No.
And what comes after you have a solid foundation is the room to build a house, right? And how you do that is slow, consistent change over a long period of time. And I do that through what I call the 1% mentality. Now, the 1% mentality is taking 5 areas of your life. And those 5 areas are your mental health, your social health or your social relationships, your spiritual health, your relational health, and your physical health, if I didn't say that. So physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual. Those 5. And what you do, is you try and grow 1% a day in one of those 5 areas. That's all you have to do. If that means like your 1% in your relational is stepping in with your spouse and saying, hey, I love you. I see you. Thank you so much for being awesome. I want to validate all of the hard work you're doing. And that's it. That's all you do your whole day. And everything else just goes to crap. But you improved by 1%, you succeeded, right? You know, if that means you get out of bed and you do 20 squats and that's all you have in you today and that's your 1%, that's your 1%. That's great. Yay. Yay, 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 1%. And that's all you have in you that entire day. Dude, that's 1%. And that's growth as a human being, because that 1% change is going to start making small changes in you. It's going to start sending small signals to your brain. And if we think about it in the realm of business, because I love data and I love numbers, any business in the world, if I came to you and said, hey, I can give you a 365% return on your business, hire me, right? Who wouldn't? What business wouldn't want a 365% return? So if I look at you and say, hey, you can make small, consistent changes by 1%. And if you do that every single day for a year, you're going to be 365% different than who you were last year. There's no difference.
Yeah.
None whatsoever. So that's what I focus on, man. I focus on being like 1% better. Like, for example, I love energy drinks. I'm drinking a root beer today. 1% better.
Yeah.
Still not good, but it's 1% better.
I honestly, I got a little bit of chills. I'm just going to say this. Of all the episodes that I've done, that passage was my favorite that I've had the pleasure of listening to. That was perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're writing a book, yeah?
Yeah, I am. It's called The 1% Mentality.
Wow. Yeah, man. I need a copy of that. That's I always get a little bit related to what a guest says on the episodes, and it felt very much to me when you're describing them, I was relating to them, and it just hit me that I was just like, I just need that little bit of more self-love in myself, and it's just that light bulb moment. So thank you so much for saying that. But like, I'm a little bit stumped.
No, you're good, bro. I've actually learned doing my own podcast that most of the time the people I bring on actually have a lesson for me more than anybody else. So it's just by divine design,
isn't it? Yeah, it happens all the time. You're listening to it, and then you're like, holy crap, that's me. That what they're saying, that's helping me right now. Seriously.
Yeah,
it's blessed. I also love the. You spoke about having, a higher power to focus on. That's something that I align myself with greatly. And I was obviously just going to ask you a little bit more about your meditation. Do you have like a set sort of meditation practice that you yourself follow every day, or a set time per week, or do you just go when you feel like you need to, just learn a little bit more about yourself, is the way that I put it?
Right. That's a great question. That's an absolutely great question. The right answer is I have a set meditation that I do all the time, and it helps keep me grounded because it's a part of my daily charge, right? The things I do every day to fight myself. Is that the truth? Not at all. What meditation? Sorry, let me back up there a little bit. So I recently read a book called The Dark Side of the Light Chasers by Debbie Ford. And in that book, there are a lot of meditations that take you into your subconscious and allow your subconscious to populate different parts of yourself. And you get the opportunity to talk to those people and learn lessons from those people, from those subpersonalities is what she calls them. And so for a while when I was reading that book, I did meditation almost daily because that was a part of the homework that I was doing within that book to grow. And what it's been for me a lot of the time is not so much of close your eyes, breathe in 7 times, allow your body to relax, go into your serene place, find your answer, and then come out and enjoy your day, right? It's not like the meditation timer style meditations that a lot of people think about when they hear the word meditation. I'm a firm believer that meditation is just a singular focus on one thing. There is a man named Thich Nhat Hanh, and he is a Buddhist monk, a very famous Buddhist monk. He's got hundreds of books that I believe he's published. And a few of his books talk about meditation. And there's another book also that kind of goes hand in hand with this that talks about the things that you can see only when you slow down. If you haven't understood already, I read a lot of books. But what I learned from that was that, again, it's just a focus on a singular thing, right? You can go on a walk and you can focus on the feeling of the bottom of your feet the whole walk, and that's a meditation. You can sit down and focus on following your breath, and that is a meditation. You can sit there and stew over one singular thing that happened a couple of days ago in anxiety, and technically it's a meditation. It's not a healthy meditation, but you're focusing on a singular thing. So what I try and do with my meditation practice is I take time to focus on singular things and invest everything that I can into them. So one of my practices that I do, especially in a world full of phones, full of technology and full of distractions, is I give every person that I come into contact with 100% of my attention, if only for a moment, because that's focusing on a singular thing. That's a meditation. So every client that comes into my center, every person I talk to the phone, like I talk on the phone to, my wife and my kids, I give at least a minute of my undivided attention to every single person every day. And to me, so it's an ongoing meditative practice, and it helps me feel more fulfilled and rich in my life.
Yeah, you're so true in what you say there. I totally agree that, like I spoke about in your podcast, meditation for me is just anything that you feel that you can promote a little bit of self-growth and while sustaining a little bit of self-nourishment at the same time. And it's so true because I think, people assume, like you said, to meditate it has to be the hum, that drawing, and which is beautiful. Some of my best meditations are during that sort of kind of practice. But I totally
And they're
agree.
very effective too.
Oh
and,
yeah,
and they're very
majorly
effective. Super effective. I've done them myself. I fully believe in them.
Yeah.
It's just not the only type.
No, totally. I was obviously I was going to ask you again to retell the story that you obviously told me of where you are now with in terms of red light therapy, and obviously how then you got onto the Wellness Center podcast.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit before we started filming, so I know Andrew knows exactly what's coming. But so a couple of years ago, I was a real estate agent and actually doing pretty good as a young buck in the real estate world. And it got to this point where I was working between 60 to 80 hours a week. I had no life. I was totally tied to my phone and my email. And yeah, my work was my life. There were times I remember being at like a friend's house and I'd be on the phone talking to a client, tossing a football back and forth instead of just being involved where I was at. And I can't tell you how many dinners and breakfasts and lunch I walked away from, how many times I missed the opportunity to cuddle with my wife in bed because I was doing paperwork at 10 to midnight and all these things. And I remember there was one night I was having a video game night with my brother-in-law, I believe. And my wife was playing indoor soccer for America, football for the rest of the world. And in one of those co-ed leagues. And she comes home. She gives me a kiss on my cheek and she says, "Hey, I'm feeling kind of funny. I got slammed on the ground. I headed the ball wrong. I'm just going to go to bed." And she was stuck in bed for 2 weeks following that co-ed game. She had sustained a very serious concussion. And my life went from 60 to 80 hours of real estate to maybe 20 hours of real estate a week. We had a 2-year-old boy and a 1-year-old daughter at the time. And my wife was bedridden. So I was her hospice nurse. I was full-time dad. I was full-time employee. I was the housemaker. I was doing everything for those 2 weeks. And it sucked. It was really, really hard on my soul. And there's a couple of things that I realized that weren't working for me. And the first thing I realized was that I hated real estate. It was not a profession for me anymore. It was not serving me or helping me live my best life. And the second thing that I learned was that I did not have a relationship with my kids and my marriage was failing. Right? I was investing too much time in real estate. So 2 weeks later, I walked away. hung up my license, gave him my 2 weeks notice, and quit real estate. Deactivated my license, paused all my certificates, closed down all my accounts. No looking back kind of mentality. And I had a lot of people tell me, don't lose your license. Don't lose your license. That'll help you make money here and there. Just don't do it full time. Just don't lose your license. And I said, no, I'm done. I hate it. So I walked away. I made a deal with my wife, and I told my wife that, sorry, little side story. So my wife, she's bedridden for 2 weeks. And at the time, my mom was starting up the wellness center, right? This business where we focus on full body red light therapy. And we pulse the light and we pulse the red light. And by pulsing it, it's actually been proven to do different things. We focus specifically on concussion repair and mental health in our center. And what we found out was that with this specific protocol that we have, these frequencies of red light that we pulse, is it would get rid of the symptoms of a concussion. So after about 2 weeks with my wife, we finally got her in the car, which consisted of like 2 sleep masks, noise canceling headphones, a neck pillow like you have in an airport. And we drive an hour both ways to get my wife into this bed. And the sessions are only 20 minutes. So we drive an hour for 20 minutes and drive an hour again. And after 4 sessions of this red light therapy, my wife was back to normal. Her symptoms were gone. She went from constant migraines, couldn't look right and left without getting really, really nauseous and dizzy, couldn't look at her phone for more than a few minutes, couldn't drive, couldn't parent, to being normal after 4 sessions, after 80 minutes of red light over the course of like 2 weeks. And so at that point, I was like, cool, my wife's good. And we made this deal where she was going to work part-time, doing her things, right? Starting her own businesses, being a yoga instructor. And I was going to work part-time, and together we were going to bring a full-time income, right? So that way I would get more time to be a dad and more time and less time to work. And then my wife would get more time to work because she likes to work as well, and less time being mom because, quite frankly, being a mom is the hardest job in the whole wide world.
Yeah.
And so we did that. And I went and joined this little nonprofit called The Family Place. And The Family Place up where I live is a really cool organization that helps troubled youth, right? Kids in abusive, drug addicted, sexually abused homes. And they get put in the wellness center, or not the wellness center, the Family Place. And essentially I was a daycare worker. They were kind enough to give me the nickname, the male involvement specialist, trying to make me feel better, but I was a daycare worker and loved that job. Had so much fun with the kids because I just got to play with them. Taught me how to play with my kids and be a good dad for my kids. It paid $13 an hour though. And I remember talking to my mom one time and I was like, this doesn't work. And my mom essentially said, come work for me. I'm opening up the wellness center. I'm opening up like a bigger actual center, and I'll pay you double. You can still work part-time, right? You have a lot more freedom this way, and I'll pay you double. And I was like, sold. So that's where the wellness center came about. The actual like red light therapy, brick and mortar business that I did. And through that process of trying to grow a brick and mortar business, we did a lot of research on what like SEO would look like, right? How to optimize your business so that you can be found on the Google, on the big World Wide Web. Yeah. And a part of that process of learning how to do SEO, I learned that a YouTube channel, because YouTube and Google talk quite a bit, right, in the back algorithms, that if you establish yourself as an industry leader on Google or YouTube, it'll help with your Google ranking.
Right. Okay.
So I started a YouTube channel called The Wellness Center. And all I did the whole time was red light therapy, red light therapy, red light therapy. And I started the Wellness Center podcast to review scientific literature involved with red light therapy. And as you're probably sitting here thinking, just like I did, it sounds terrible. It's because it was. It was so boring. It was so boring. And I was just feeling so burnt out after about 1.5 years of just struggling to get the business started, almost 2 years, and get it up and going and working with my mom. And I love my mom. She's an amazing business partner. And I just personally was feeling burnt out. And I remember talking to my wife back in January, so just a couple months ago, and saying like, oh my gosh, I need to bring myself into this center or I'm going to burn out and quit, just like I have with like every other job I've ever done. And I talked to my wife and told her how I wanted to, since the channel was called the Wellness Center, not the Red Light Center, I wanted to focus on full wellness, which is mental health, in my opinion. So I sat down with my wife and I just brainstormed the 5 questions that I ask on my personal podcast. And I kind of presented those questions to her and asked what she thought. And she said, this is a great idea. It's a great idea. And so I talked to my mom probably a couple of weeks prior just to wanting to change the podcast. And with the right business acumen, she said, no, it needs to stay red light therapy so we can continue to optimize our channel. And I didn't agree with that. So I waited until she went on a cruise, and I was kind of sneaky about it. And I essentially got a couple of people, like my therapist, one of my close friends who's also a therapist, and one other person, and I filmed all of them within the 2 weeks that my mom was gone. And I edited the videos, I created intros, I uploaded it all, and I got really good feedback for the podcast that I was doing. And so essentially what I do is I bring every single person on. And if you guys haven't listened to Andrew's episode already, make sure to go and do it, because Andrew has an awesome story. And I ask people these 5 questions. I bring them on and I say, take us back to a young you. When were some of the first times that you struggled with your mental health? And then I ask them to take us through like a hero's journey. And then I ask them about coping skills that they developed from the hero's journey and how they've evolved over time. After that, I ask them about appreciation for the journey, looking back, what can you appreciate? And then the last question I ask people is, what advice do you have for those just getting into the realm of mental health? So I did that with my first couple of guests, brought them on, stellar, knock it out of the park style conversations. And I remember getting done and uploading them to YouTube and not telling my mom. And I made the first episodes published really quick. I blasted it out to all my groups and my friends and emails and all the things. And it got the most feedback, most views, most likes that I'd ever gotten on a show in over like 200 videos that I've filmed on this channel. And I remember sending it to my mom and I'm saying, hey, this is the direction I'm going with the Wellness Center podcast. And she was an absolute champ about it. And she was like, I love it. This is amazing. You absolutely have to. And yeah, that's when it evolved. February 2nd was my first release. And I have people come on once a week. And it's been getting an overwhelming amount of responses from people wanting to come on my show, from people like listening and watching my show. And I feel so blessed, right? It's all by divine design. And I just feel so fortunate that I finally stepped into this role of my life, and to see it bless so many people is awesome. And to be able to connect with so many people too, I think is one of the coolest parts of a podcast, right? Andrew, I don't know some of the people you've been able to meet yet, but I've met like retired pro wrestlers. I've met SWAT officers from like major cities, male models. It's self-help coaches, this super rock star dude from Scotland named Andrew. I don't know if you guys know him, but he's super awesome. And I could listen to his episode all day just because I love his accent. And I know I'm the guy with the accent in this podcast though. So please don't be offended by me. But no, it's so cool, and it's connecting, and it's so fulfilling. So yeah, that's kind of like where I've been in the last couple of months of my life.
It really is, like you say, it really self-narrative, fulfilling, and great feedback, because it really is mostly all positive feedback that we get on podcasts like this, because it's such a stigmatized subject, which was going to lead me on to a question I was going to have. It was actually my mum that wants me to ask you this. Is what is the general kind of view in America on mental health? I know, is it highly stigmatized, or are people starting to come around to it? I know in Scotland we're kind of going through this transient stage. Our government just blamed a load of wasting money on people on mental health, which doesn't help. So our government don't even. Yeah, exactly. It's terrible. I hope that America's slightly better than that.
That's a great question, and it's hard to answer because I feel like America is such a diverse populace, right? There's so many different people and groups and cultures and ideologies and relationships and all of those things. I can tell you what I know from my personal relationships and developments is that the world is heavily leaning on mental health, or America is heavily leaning to mental health, right? There were the big stigmas of you never have a therapist. Why would you only have a therapist if you actually have a real problem. Oh, you want to kill yourself? Suck it up, right? That was the old mentality, right? That was the mentality my parents were raised with. And that was essentially the mentality that I was raised with too, right? So what I'm seeing now is in my life, in the lives of others, in those lives that I surround myself with, a lot of people are learning and taking a step back and saying, whoa, hey, maybe the suck it up mentality actually isn't healthy.
Yeah.
Right. We have, and on one aspect, I would say that like the suicide rates are climbing quite a bit.
Big time,
Mental health rates are climbing quite a bit. It didn't help with the COVID. I don't know how COVID was in IMouth or IMOR.
IMO, yeah.
IMO. Okay. But it was really bad, and that made mental health really bad. It made it a lot worse. So I think because of COVID, one of the gems, one of the gifts that came from COVID is that a lot of people realized that they were messed up. So a lot of people started really diving into learning to be okay with themselves. So I do think that my generation and some of the generation before I think you said it in a really beautiful way on my podcast, is that we're kind of the generation, because you're what, late 20s, Andrew?
No, I'm just mid 30s. Still in the same generation.
Okay. Yeah, still same generation. But a lot of our generation is starting to do this big push towards mental health. And I think the younger generations and some of the older generations are seeing this and saying, whoa, okay, maybe there's something here, right? Maybe there's some truth and validity behind being, validating your feelings and experiences and learning to set boundaries and be okay with oneself. So yeah, I definitely think we're just on the cusp. We're just starting. We're just turning the corner here. I would say give it 10 years and it is going to be mental health world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, massively. Yeah. Like I say, the podcast, it's the general population in the UK, certainly in Scotland, like I said, a little bit more. We seem to be opening up rapidly, actually. The charities are. I mean, we're getting support groups in small towns which guys can go to anonymously and talk about their feelings, and there's just so much out there just now that is getting pushed, and it is beautiful to see. I always like to ask a guest, do you have any messages for anybody that's potentially listening? Maybe they're listening to this episode, they're worried, they're maybe a little bit confused. Do they have a mental health problem? They're not too sure how they're feeling. Could you just give them a message? Obviously, having gone through a story similar kind of paths, that we always kind of have these sentiments deep down inside of us now.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this. I love this question. And if you resonated with anything I said, right? If you struggled with being a people pleaser, if you struggled with feeling like you were second best to material items, if you felt like you'd be given away, if you felt like you were never enough or you couldn't hold anything down, if you felt like life was just too much for whatever extingent circumstance you went through, right? For me, it was a suicide. If you've ever experienced any one of those, I am living proof, and Andrew is living proof that you are not alone, right? And those people who are suicidal, I'm big into the realm of suicide. I'm a huge advocate for anti-suicide. And a lot of times when you are feeling hopeless and you are in the dark depths of your soul and all you can think is, I want to give up, I want to get out, there is nothing more for me on this earth, and people would be happy with me being gone. I want you to know that those feelings are normal and that they're human and that it's okay, right? It's not okay to feel them forever, but it's okay that you're feeling them. And I invite you, I sincerely and truly invite you to be okay that you're not okay and to accept it. And then just to look at yourself objectively and say, okay, I'm not okay, and that's okay. I'm not okay, and that's okay. I'm not okay, and that's okay. What in my life is not okay? What do I hate about my life? Right? And this is your permission from a random guy you don't know in America. If you say, man, I want to go work at a pea packaging factory, and that's all I want to do with my life, and that's what's going to make me happy, go do it. There's nothing wrong with that. That is amazing if that's what's helping you become your best self, right? You could say, I want to be a professional fighter. I want to be a butcher. I want to be an artist. I want to make music. I want to rap. Like, give yourself permission to be you. Accept who you are, accept where you're at, be okay with it, and then go and be the person you want to be. God didn't put us on this earth so you could be anyone else other than you. And no one else, your parents, your friends, your church leaders, no one gets to tell you who you are. No one knows you as good as you are. No one knows what's going to help you live in your heart. Go and be that person. Be the person God told you to be, that he designed you to be, that you know you are, and do it shamelessly. And don't worry about what other people say. Just be okay with you and know that that's normal.
Wow. You nearly got me a bit jarred there. That was beautiful, man. And massive kudos for remembering that I worked in a pea packaging factory too. That's extremely attentive to detail.
I thought you'd appreciate that comment.
I really did. Jace, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I would love to get you back on to talk more about, your pillars, the 1%. You are an incredibly intelligent, intellectual guy who is nothing short of inspirational. I'll just put it like that. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I'm just,
dude, you give me keep the compliments coming, man. You're stroking my ego. I love it.
You gave me an amazing intro, so I'm giving you an amazing outro.
I appreciate it, Andrew. Thank you so much for holding the space for me to come on here and to be very vulnerable and raw with some of the experiences that I've had to live through in my life. I really appreciate the energy that you bring about your podcast. You're doing really good stuff.
Yeah, thank you. And same to you. And like I said, I'd love to have you back on at any time in the future, and just keep on doing what you're doing, Jason. Things are just going to, they're just going to explode through you. You're such a lovely guy, and that's just true. That reflects just so well when you talk. You've certainly, like I said, multiple times during this episode left me pretty much lost for words, which is rare to do, trust me.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
So thank you. And thank you guys for listening in. It's been an absolute pleasure. And once again, thanks to my guest, Chase. I hope you've really enjoyed tonight's episode. From Chase and Andrew and myself, this has been the Borderline Podcast. Good night.